In a shocking turn of events, Russia is retaliating, and it is punishing the West with high oil prices. We all know the G7 is hammering Russia with sanctions, and the most recent price ceiling on oil goods was the final straw. Putin has had enough and is turning the tables by limiting oil output. Russia just announced a stunning supply decrease, warning that they will reduce oil output by 500,000 barrels per day in March if the West continues to embargo his oil. And now it would seem Putin has fulfilled his pledge. What does this latest move mean for the West, and how will Putin's master oil plan unfold? Stay tuned till the end to find out. Remember to like the video if you are enjoying our content. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications in order to stay connected. Russia's unexpected reduction in oil output is now a strategic decision. They timed it perfectly because the globe is already in the grip of a recession. And right now, this motion plainly indicates two things. One, Russia is showing off its trump card. They understand that the world still requires Russian oil and that decreasing output now will boost inflation. Second, Russia is prepared to send the West into a recession in order to get them back to the bargaining table. Right. He understands that money and weaponry will continue to pour into Ukraine as a result of recent events, and the G7 sanctions will continue indefinitely. As a result, this supply curtailment is most certainly a Russian financial counteroffensive. Then let us examine the strategies between the West and Russia. Today, the West as a whole is attempting to drain Russian earnings. All of the tanks sent to Zelensky, all of the sanctions imposed on Russia are intended to bankrupt Putin. They want him to be unable to continue fighting and to surrender. Russia's aim, on the other hand, is to boost oil inflation and the West to deficit spending. He wants them to go deeper into debt by printing money to subsidize energy prices and fund Ukraine's military expenditures. And by lowering oil production now, Putin is betting that inflation will be severe enough that central banks will intervene. Hiking rates must be maintained. He desires a revival of inflation in the West so that the Federal Reserve and the ECB will hike rates further, pushing the economy off a cliff. Since the middle of last year, major central banks throughout the world, particularly in the G7, have been rising rates constantly. In less than a year, the Fed funds rate has risen from near zero to over 5%. The ECB's benchmark rate rose from 0.25% to 2.5%, while the Bank of England raised its rate 10 times to 4%. And the fact that the economy is still standing today is quite miraculous. And by inflating the West, Putin is attempting to conclude the conflict by winning the financial struggle. This might be his strategy for bringing everyone back to the bargaining table. According to Russia's deputy prime minister, the system of price restrictions on Russian oil and petroleum products is an interference in market relations and an extension of damaging energy policies. On the surface, Russia's output appears to be in direct response to the G7 price cap, but the underlying goal may be to reignite the inflationary embers and usher in a second wave of higher energy costs. Now, Putin's cut might seem small compared to the previous OPEC cut of 2 million barrels, but 500,000 barrels only represents 5% of Russian oil production, so there's still room for it to escalate. According to IMF estimates, the West, particularly Europe, is on the verge of a recession. The Eurozone as a whole will only grow by 0.7% this year, with the UK predicted to decrease by 0.6% and Germany on the verge of a recession. Thus, if Russia increased the inflationary pressures sufficiently, it may be the final straw that pushes the Eurozone into a recession, since we must consider Russia's point of view. Thus far, they have been fighting that battle while in a recession, but the West will be in positive GDP territory by 2022. Even the hardline Russian central bank has warned of a deficit. They are predicting a contraction of up to 1%. As a result, Russia may still be in a recession in 2023. But can the West continue to invest to keep the war alive, especially if it goes into recession? Would individuals in Europe and the United States reconsider helping Ukraine while their own economies are contracting? It is the trillion-dollar dilemma. Then there's the matter of India and China. Wouldn't a reduction in oil supplies pinch Asia and hinder its recovery now? It's a little more complicated than a simple yes or no response. In nominal terms, reducing Russia's oil production raises the worldwide price of oil. Yet they have already begun selling oil at a 30 to 40% discount to India and China. But there's another reasonable thing they should ask. Could Russia even ship them their oil? Putin, on the other hand, has created a massive shadow fleet of over 600 ships to transfer his merchandise from Russian ports to Asia. Hence, even if the euro price rises over $60, it is still feasible to avoid penalties. Today, Russia effectively continues to sell cheap oil to India and China in comparison to the rest of the globe. As a result, cheap Russian oil is boosting the Asian economy, while the West must pay greater rates for energy on the free market. This will undoubtedly harm their economies, particularly Germany's. According to sources, Russia is set to raise the price of dairy oil. Because the euro is minus $20 to Brent crude, we Brent at $86 today. Russia may be selling dairy oil over the price cap at the moment. According to Credit Suisse, Germany's robust GDP growth in the past was a result of cheap Russian energy. We can see that the value of German industry was dependent on $20 billion in Russian energy inputs. As a result, if such inputs are suddenly denied to the Eurozone and shifted to India and China, those countries will expand faster than the rest of the globe. Russia is virtually supporting their expansion, and Russia understands that Western sanctions have limits. And we just have to go back a few weeks to see what occurred when Ukrainian congressmen urged that the U.S. penalize India and China for buying Russian oil. It didn't exactly work. Even the United States has stated that it would not penalize India. Customers in Russia will not desert them either. We have Ajit Doval, India's national security advisor, meeting with Putin to discuss bilateral trade and pledging to work toward a greater India-Russia strategic cooperation. And the globe is beginning to break into several chunks, particularly when it comes to energy, oil, and gas. Since you can't punish the entire world, Russian oil will continue to flow. As a result, even after Russia's oil reduction, OPEC has no plans to act. Simply said, Saudi Arabia and the Middle East are not on their way to save the globe. They are not going to pump additional oil to bring down rising energy costs, since what Russia did was fundamentally profitable for them. Increased pricing imply they may make more money for selling fewer items. In terms of Southeast oil sales, they are the largest supplier of crude to China and the second largest supplier to India. Even if the West enters a recession, the majority of oil sales are in locked contracts to Asian countries. Even the United States no longer purchases the majority of its oil from the Persian Gulf or OPEC. And we can see that, over time, Canada has become America's largest supplier, with supplies from the Middle East practically disappearing. So we need to understand how globalization is actually manifesting itself in the oil markets. This is a direct result of the penalties and price restriction. Increased pricing imply they may make more money for selling fewer items. In terms of Southeast oil sales, they are the largest supplier of crude to China and the second largest supplier to India. Even if the West enters a recession, the majority of oil sales are in locked contracts to Asian countries. Nonetheless, Europe had enough gas on hand, and the winter was mild enough. Thus, Putin's gamble did not pay off. Whether the oil card is actually intended to safeguard revenues or to increase inflationary pressures, it could not come at a worse moment, right? We know that corporations are laying off workers, particularly in the technology industry. Nearly 600 technology businesses alone announced huge layoffs in 2022. Big banks such as Morgan Stanley have also predicted a profit slump. And this might be enough to bring the markets down. Thus far, the war has been waged in an atmosphere of positive GDP for the West. But what if unemployment increases? What if the stock market falls and inflation resumes its upward trend? Will the West be able to explain its help to Ukraine? Will they print money in order to sustain their own economy or Ukraine? Because doing both will be difficult to explain. Russia is accustomed to battling through a recession, while the West may not have the courage to fight during one. Everyone is talking about peak inflation and disinflation, but this output decrease has really shook things up. And now, a year after the Ukrainian crisis began, China is planning a historic visit to Moscow. A meeting between Xi and Putin is almost certainly on the cards. Is the agenda going to be focused on oil and gas? And we need to keep an eye on this, because if China's reopening is unaffected and they can still buy cheap oil from Russia, we can anticipate Putin to ratchet up the inflation agony even more. And that means more agony in the coming days than there was in 2022. But now let us hear from you in the comments section below. Do you think Russia's move towards oil cuts will act in Putin's favor? Or will it backfire and spell more misery for Russia? Share your thoughts and opinions in the comments section below. That's how we wrap things up for today. Kindly like the video to help YouTube learn your preferences, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to hit that bell notification feature to stay informed when new videos are posted. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video.